Churchtown Morgue. The flickering fluorescent lights cast an eerie glow over the sterile tiled walls of the Churchtown Morgue. Sam Walker, a young mortician's assistant, had just clocked in for his night shift. It was his first time working alone, and the smell of formaldehyde combined with the emptiness of the morgue felt oppressive. He reassured himself it was just a job, nothing he hadn't seen before. Think of the overtime, he kept murmuring to himself under his breath. The morgue was silent, except for the hum of the refrigerators. Sam's tasks for the night were straightforward: log the new arrivals, prepare bodies for autopsies, and ensure everything was in order for the day shift. He started by organising the paperwork, trying to ignore the uneasy feeling gnawing at his gut. As he worked, he couldn't shake the sensation of being watched. He glanced around the room, but there was nothing out of the ordinary. Just cold, lifeless bodies covered in white sheets and fitted with identity toe tags, each waiting for their final rest. Sam chuckled nervously, chiding himself for being jumpy. He moved to the refrigeration units, opening the heavy steel doors one by one to check the bodies inside. He was halfway through his checks when he came across a tag that read, "John Doe." The body was that of an older man, his face pale and gaunt. Sam's eyes were drawn to the man's hand, which seemed to twitch slightly. He blinked, staring intently, but the hand remained still. "Must be my imagination," Sam muttered, closing the door and moving on. Around midnight, Sam sat down to eat his sandwich in the break room. The small radio on the counter crackled to life, broadcasting the late-night news. Sam listened absent-mindedly, trying to focus on anything but the morgue's eerie silence. Suddenly, the power went out, plunging the room into darkness. The radio cut off mid-sentence, leaving Sam in a disquieting silence. He fumbled blindly through the cupboards for the old emergency flashlight and hoped the batteries had some charge, cursing under his breath. The yellowed, weak beam of light pierced the darkness, revealing the stark, clinical surroundings of the break room. Sam made his way back to the main room, the flashlight casting eerie, long dancing shadows on the walls. As he approached the refrigeration units, he heard a faint sound like a distant whisper. He stopped, straining to listen. The whispering grew louder, more insistent, echoing through the cold, empty room. "Hello?" Sam called out, his voice trembling. "Is someone there?" There was no response, just the relentless whispering. Sam followed the sound to the far corner of the room, where an old, unused gurney stood. The whispering stopped abruptly as he approached. He felt a chill run down his spine, his breath visible in the cold air. Just as he was about to turn back, the whispering resumed, now coming from behind him. Sam spun around, shining his flashlight frantically. The beam landed on the refrigerator door he had checked earlier, the one housing the John Doe. The door was ajar, and the sheet covering the body had slipped, revealing the man's pallid face. Heart pounding, Sam stepped closer. The whispering seemed to emanate from the very air around him, growing louder and more distorted. He reached out with a trembling hand to close the door, but as he did, John Doe's eyes snapped open, staring directly at him. Sam stumbled back, dropping the flashlight. The morgue was plunged into darkness again, and he heard the unmistakable sound of the refrigerator door creaking open further. He scrambled to pick up the flashlight, his hands shaking uncontrollably. When he finally managed to turn it back on, the beam revealed that the John Doe was now sitting up on the gurney, his head tilted at an unnatural angle. His mouth moved, forming words that Sam couldn't understand. Who are you?" Sam stammered, his back pressed against the cold tiled wall. The dead man smiled, a grotesque, unsettling grin. "I am the watcher in the dark, the whisper in the silence," he intoned, his voice a low guttural rasp. "And I am not alone." As he spoke, the other refrigerator doors began to creak open one by one. The bodies inside started to move, their eyes opening, their limbs twitching. The whispering grew to a cacophony, filling the room with a chorus of voices from beyond the grave. Sam bolted for the door, but it slammed shut before he could reach it. He pounded on it, screaming for help, but his cries were drowned out by the chorus of the dead. He turned to face the room, his flashlight flickering as the corpses began to rise from their gurneys, their movements jerky and unnatural. John Doe stepped forward, his eyes locked on Sam. "You disturbed our rest, and now you will join us," he said, his voice a deathly whisper. Sam backed into a corner, his mind racing for a way out. He remembered the emergency exit in the back of the morgue and darted towards it, weaving between the reanimated bodies. He could feel cold, clammy hands reaching for him, but he managed to slip through their grasp. He reached the emergency exit and pushed it open, bursting out into the cold night air. He ran as fast as he could, not daring to look back. Behind him, the morgue was silent once more, the doors closed, the lights flickering back on. Sam didn't stop running until he reached the nearest house. He banged on the door, frantic and breathless. An elderly woman answered, her eyes widening in shock at the sight of him. "Please help me," Sam gasped. "The morgue! The dead! They're alive!" The woman hesitated for a moment before opening the door fully and letting him inside. She didn't take his wild mumbling seriously, speculating that he had either taken a hallucinogen, probably LSD, mescaline, psilocybin, PCP, or a cocktail of these as they were popular among the younger adults in the town. Or he had some kind of deep mental problem. Either way, she called the police. When the authorities arrived at the morgue, they found everything in order. The bodies were where they should be, the refrigeration doors securely closed. There was no sign of any disturbance. Sam's story was met with skepticism, and he was encouraged to undergo a psych evaluation. His ramblings were dismissed as the behaviour of a man under the influence of a hallucinogen, but it was agreed that on this occasion, for his record, his personnel file would conclude that he had been experiencing extreme stress. He left his job at the morgue and moved away from Churchtown, haunted by the memories of that night. He would never be the same again. The old convivial and ebullient Sam had gone. That night had taken something from deep within him. His eyes were dark and shallow, his skin pale and damp, and the confidence of youth had evaporated. Those who knew him best could not bring themselves to believe his story, although there had been many creepy stories about Churchtown's morgue over the years. They started after the old pathologist had died some years ago, under mysterious circumstances that were never really resolved. Sometimes the veil between the living and the dead was thinner than anyone cared to admit. And though Sam had escaped, the whispering voices and the cold, lifeless eyes would forever haunt his dreams, a reminder of the terror that lurked in the darkness. The Mercer Foundation. The old mortuary on the outskirts of the city had been thought abandoned for years. Its Gothic architecture stood as a silent sentinel, deterring curious onlookers with its decaying facade. Yet, beneath the surface, a sinister criminal operation thrived, cloaked in shadows and deceit. Dr. William Mercer was a name synonymous with hope and healing. A renowned surgeon, he had pioneered numerous life-saving procedures and founded the Mercer Foundation, a high-profile charity providing complex and expensive medical care to children and young adults. His public persona was that of a compassionate saviour, but behind closed doors, he was the mastermind of a gruesome enterprise that turned human suffering into profit. In the dimly lit basement of the mortuary, Dr. Mercer stood over a cold metal table. The stark, clinical light revealed his surgical precision as he harvested all the usable components from his latest victim. Beside him was his right-hand man, Victor Reyes, a former combat medic with a dubious past. Victor's rugged exterior and steely resolve made him indispensable to Mercer's operation. Through their collaboration over the years, Dr. Mercer had mentored and raised Victor's surgical skills to the highest level, and they would often challenge each other on the slab to see who could dismantle and harvest the most reusable parts during a session. The wager was usually a case of beer. "We need to move faster," Mercer said, his voice cold and methodical. "The demand from our buyers is increasing, and we don't want to open a gap in the market for competition to enter." Victor smiled and nodded. "I wouldn't be overly concerned. The last entrant to our market ended up on this slab, remember?" Wiping his hands on a bloodied cloth. "Don't worry, I'll bring more strays tomorrow. The shelters are full this time of year. Don't you find it ironic that a stray 17-year-old kid isn't worth the time of day to most people?" but put them on this slab and give me an hour and a sharp knife and they're worth up to $500,000. Don't it make you laugh and love America? In another room, Marie Collins, a nurse who had once been a rising star, meticulously catalogued the harvested organs and body parts. Marie's fall from grace had been swift and brutal, a result of her making a fatal error in the administering of a dangerous drug to a patient. Mercer had seen an opportunity and exploited her vulnerability, offering her a way out in exchange for her compliance and loyalty. She didn't see any other option, other than do jail time and lose her well-paid career. "We've got a full consignment of hearts, kidneys, livers, lungs and pancreases ready for shipment," Marie reported, her voice devoid of emotion as she checked off the customer order. Watching over them was Anthony Tony Marconi, a former cop turned enforcer. Tony's broad shoulders and intimidating presence kept the operation running smoothly. His loyalty to Mercer stemmed from a mix of blackmail and a shared disdain for the world. Tony had once been a hero, but corruption had tainted him, leading him into Mercer's dark embrace. "We've got a new order from the Middle East," Tony announced, his voice gruff. "They need a liver and a pair of lungs within the week." Mercer's eyes gleamed with a dangerous mix of ambition and madness. "Then let's not disappoint our clients." The operation ran like a well-oiled machine. Victor prowled the streets and shelters, luring the homeless and vulnerable with promises of food, shelter, and money. Once inside the mortuary, they were sedated and prepped for surgery. Marie's skilled hands ensured the organs were harvested quickly and efficiently, while Tony managed logistics, ensuring the products reached their international buyers without a hitch. Despite the horrors they perpetuated, each member of the team had their justification. Mercer saw himself as a god, providing life to those who could afford it, while cleansing the streets of what he deemed undesirables. Victor loved his job. He had no emotional or ethical angst. He was a psychopath. Tony was good at his job and enjoyed the freedom and power he wielded within the group. The world had already chewed him up and spat him out, and he was bitter, angry and resentful of all outsiders. Marie didn't overthink things and enjoyed the benefits Mercer supplied. She had soon grown to fill the position offered by Dr. Mercer and found she hadn't had a moral or ethical quandary about her actions or involvement within the business, allowing her to carry out her tasks with robotic efficiency. But cracks began to appear in their facade when Marie found out she was pregnant, the changing hormones now coursing through her body, and the awareness that she was going to have a child of her own were impacting heavily on her emotions and changing values. She was becoming increasingly haunted by the faces of their victims, and for the first time, she started to question her role. One day, feeling a little emotional from the hormonal levels, she confided in Victor, her secret weighing heavily on her heart. "I'm pregnant," she whispered, her eyes hollow. "I can't keep doing this. I need to leave and start over somewhere far away." Victor's jaw tightened. "You know Mercer won't allow it. He won't let any of us leave." "I don't care," Marie's voice trembled. "If they don't let me go, I'll go to the cops. I have enough evidence to bring this whole operation down." Victor stared at her. He was surprised at the change in her and couldn't understand how she could be conflicted. But he hid his reaction well. "You know what you're saying is dangerous, right?" Marie nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I can't stay here, Victor. Not with a child." "Okay, I understand, Marie. I'll have a word with Dr. Mercer and sort something out. In the meantime, don't do anything reckless. Remember, he puts loyalty above everything else." Victor reported the conversation to Mercer, who responded with icy calm. "She's a liability now," Mercer said, his voice devoid of emotion. "We can't risk her exposing us." Tony, ever pragmatic, suggested the unthinkable. "We need to harvest her organs. She's healthy, and her baby will fetch a premium price." Victor nodded. "It's the only way." They cornered Marie that night, her pleas for mercy falling on deaf ears. Mercer's surgical skill was put to its darkest use yet as he performed the procedure. Her muffled screams echoed in the basement as Victor and Tony looked on with admiration for his skills, their faces expressionless. The next day it was business as usual. The mortuary was silent once more, and the operation continued without a hitch. Marie's organs and the unborn child were shipped off to eager buyers, and the team moved on to their next victims. Dr. William Mercer, Victor Reyes and Tony Marconi maintained their dark empire, driven by greed, loyalty, and a twisted sense of purpose. They remained shadows in the night, their deeds hidden beneath a veneer of respectability and charity.